Good afternoon, dear freedom lovers. Today is the 396th day of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the full-scale invasion. It is a great honor for me today to host this discussion about the reconstruction, about the libertarian reconstruction of Ukraine, of my homeland, the country that keeps fighting every day for the full-scale freedom. Today, our guests are Marcin Święcicki, who is known in Poland for, first of all, contributing to the constitutional limit of the public debt of 60% of the GDP. Mr. Święcicki had also been the mayor of Warsaw in the 90s. And from 2015, His Excellency Święcicki is the leading expert of the Polish group to the Ukrainian decentralization reform. Jakub Karnowski, he right now is a member of the supervisory board of the Ukrainian Railways and the Ukrainian Post. Besides his high-tier managerial roles, he's also the head of the Liberal Economics Unit at the Warsaw School of Economics, and also the supervisor of the student organization for Ukraine's recovery, where we, with our fellow researchers, are preparing a plan for Ukraine's recovery and the European integration. Jaroslav Romanchuk is a prominent Belarusian economist. He's the pioneer of the libertarian thought in Belarus. He is also the head of the Mises Society in Belarus and a two-time laureate of the Anthony Thor Fisher Award for his books. Mr. Romanchuk had also been the deputy of the United Civic Party of Belarus and was a member of the Commission of the Economic Policy and Reform at the Supreme Council of Belarus. So, having our guests introduced, let me ask you the first question. The war is the situation full of uncertainty. However, the thing that we really know for sure is the wide range of the economic and social problems that Ukraine will be left with. How do you think, what is the role of the state in solving these problems, and will it be the free market that will make the economic miracle of Ukraine a real story? Let's begin with you.
Okay, thank you very much. Of course, thank you for the invitation. The war will leave Ukraine with many problems, and some of them are continuation of the previous problems, and there are some new problems here, like destruction of Ukraine, like a certain tendency to etatism during the war, which is understandable, but it cannot go too far. And also the enormous challenges of reconstruction, again, engaging the state in this reconstruction process, and again, in certain ways, stimulating or promoting etatistic solutions. So this is the threat for the liberalization of Ukraine after the war. But also there are some positive, I would say, factors, like aspiration to become member of European Union. And in general, of course, we can contest European bureaucracy and European over-regulation sometimes, but in principle, there are many areas in which Ukraine, aspiring to Europe, will have to liberalize their approach, to treat foreign capital as domestic capital. The regime in foreign trade will be fully liberalized, access to market, public aid will be forbidden with only few exceptions. Liberalization in infrastructure, in for example, air transportation and railroad transportation. Those are standards in Europe already for several years. So adjusting to those European standards will require a more liberal approach. But, of course, there are some issues that the European Union is not regulating. For example, privatization process. Every country can privatize more or less. It's not a requirement of the European Union. Or corruption, there is a pressure to fight, to limit corruption. It is one of the conditions, etc. But there is no any kind of formal measure, you know, what kind of corruption is allowed, what is not. So, as I say, European Union in general will be, process of accession to European Union will work in liberalization, but this will not solve all the problems.
Now I would like to address this question to Professor Karnowski, having that you have experience working with the Ukrainian state enterprise, so your view from inside.
Thank you, Yuliia. Allow me to start with saying that we've been working at the Students' Club at Warsaw School of Economics together with Yuliia and a few others, students with Ukrainian origin at the plan. I have it with me, a plan of reconstruction and European integration of Ukraine. That's something we presented as a first version, first draft in October last year at the EFNI, European Forum for New Ideas Conference in Sopot. And we hope to present the second version we are currently working on in June in Kiev. This is something which we were working on a weekly basis since May last year, so since the beginning of the war, and we're trying to find all these answers to this very pertinent question, for example, the question which was asked by you, Yuliia, now. It's difficult, of course, to answer that question in one word or not even one sentence. So allow me to say that that's true. I'm the beneficiary of being an independent supervisory board member of two logistic strategic companies in Ukraine, the railways and the post. And this is something which is sounds really bizarre or interesting. Because here we have at the strategic companies in Ukraine, the foreigners are taking the most strategic decision. This shows you that the very interesting structure. By the way, it was mentioned by Putin 2 days before the invasion as an argument why Ukraine is not an independent country. And the answer was, Putin answered that this is because the foreigners are in charge of the strategic decision in the strategic companies. Of course, that's Putin's true, which is not true, or allow me to say bullshit. But basically, trying to answer the question on a general level, I would say that Ukraine needs to take into advantage, the Ukrainian policymaker needs to learn from the lessons from the countries in transition as Poland and the other countries for the last 30 years. And the one lesson which comes to my mind is the state should be limited. Privatization should be a part of the reforms, and basically, when we look at the details, at the specific steps, let's try to learn and execute the lessons from the countries, good and bad lessons, which were in the position. And the war, the last sentence here, the war is not only that tragic, of course, even when people are being killed, both military heroic people and civilians, but also the war creates the opportunity to rebuild the country in a new way. And of course, that was the case after the Second World War in Europe, where the various institutions like the International Bank of Reconstruction and Development were created. The World Bank, that's the common name of the bank. And Ukraine will benefit from these lessons, I hope, after the war. This is going to be one of opportunity, the window of opportunity which won't repeat. So I hope the lessons will be learned and executed after the victory.
Jaroslav, please contribute, because you keep working with the Ukrainian government on developing the security of our economical situation.
Right. I'm in Kiev right now for about 2 years, and I don't have good news about the libertarian agenda. We have to be very realistic where we are. Ukraine, before the war, was the poorest country because it has never lived a single day in the state of even moderate economic freedom. You know, index, Ukraine ranked 126th. And essentially, if politically it's a hybrid regime, economically it was one of the countries that never experienced economic freedom. Secondly, if you look at the size of the government, overall government expenditures in the last 20 years, on average, it was about 45% of GDP. If you add about 15-17% of a regulatory burden, transaction costs, you have like a serfdom where entrepreneurial spirit is being stifled by the Leviathan. In terms of monetary policy quality, you have inflation in the last 20 years averaging about 13%, which makes Ukraine on the 13th position in the world in the worst inflation-wise countries. 13 countries, like 10th is Belarus, 13th is Ukraine, and it means that monetary policy sucks. In the last 20 years, Ukraine has never had a balanced budget. And in 2022, bad things happened because, well, in being in Ukraine during the beginning of the war, we came up with the war economy proposal to overhaul the economy, which meant more decentralization, more entrepreneurial spirit, more power to the people. The opposite happened. Now the government owns and manages over 60% of all assets, including banking sector. The government stuck to very bad central planning decisions like price regulation. The government recently private nationalized one of the gas station networks, and it wants to come with a like 35% of the market belonging to the government, to the state. And the people who are running economic policy would remind you of a well-known personality in Poland like Grzegorz Kołotko. Just imagine Kolotko's type of people who run Ukrainian economy right now, and what makes things worse, we have a number of Kolotko-type people coming from the West. There are at least 6 major strategic blueprints for reforms coming from CSIS, from Center for Economic Policy Reform, coming even from KSU Poland. And most of these proposals are based on keeping the model of strong government intervention, where the government's position would be the management or redistribution of about 40-45% of all GDP. In 2022, the volume of government expenditures, think about it, was over 75% of GDP, and the general government budget was about 25% of GDP. The foreign debt went up to 90, and so there is got limited exposure to free market reforms in the government because apart from what we have like Council of Ministers, people who are responsible for economic policy, there is a parallel decision-making structures that make things very complicated for whatever reformers are. And from the West, from CSIS, from IMF, we keep the kind of requests and demands to increase taxes, to kill this most favorable tax mode for micro and small enterprises. We keep this urgency, this message that Ukraine should go forward within the mainstream economic European regulatory tax policy, which effectively will cement the oligarchy structure Ukraine has right now. That's why we designed and proposed a new free market strategy for Ukraine. It is being considered by the President's Office, by Security Council, by Verkhovna Rada, and definitely we need support. Because on the one hand, we here in Poland definitely stand up for Ukraine and want to support and wish it success. But on the other hand, Poland, as a part of the international community, is part of many initiatives that would rather expand the socialist experiment and make Ukraine's reconstruction much more problematic.
It's not a secret that the macroeconomic accounts of Ukraine have been sustained with the European funds right now. What, however, remains a mystery is the future of the recovery funds and their management. Dear speakers, how do you think should the management process of the recovery funds that are expected to be flooded in Ukraine, hopefully, how they should be managed? And here I would like to begin with Jakub, since we have reviewed many of suggestions how it should be. What is your opinion on that?
Well, that's true that Ukraine is being helped with the funds already. The budget support is crucial for Ukrainian economy to operate during the war. It's around 5 billion euros every month coming into the budget to allow the country to operate. This is strict direct budgetary support in addition to what's very important companies like Укрзалізниця are doing. So I believe that some setup which is necessary to allow this money which will come after the war from the major donors, including international financial institutions, will be somehow in operation already when the war, or how we call it, at least at our students' club, conditions for peace will be created. Because what's necessary from the perspective of the economy, it's that the investors will be ready to come with the private funds. And this is the crucial word I wanted to say here. The private funds, they will do that when they can be assured that the investment they will come with won't be destroyed by the Russian rockets. They need the conditions of peace. So we need the conditions of peace, and I believe the public money from the governments, the governments of the Western countries, American money, and the World Bank, EBRD, EIB, this money will come, but what's the most necessary, and I think at the previous panel it was said already that we need to create the conditions for the private investors to be ready to take the risk with the expected return on a horizon, substantial expected return, so this kind of sharp ratio expected return to the risk taken will be enough to invest, and that's what's necessary. So again, it's not easy, but what we are looking for is the conditions for the private money to come. To create these conditions, we need conditions of peace, and that's the most important thing, I believe.
Dear Jaroslav, for you as a person who has a closer look to the opinion of the government in this regard, how would you comment?
Right now, the major support or idea how to reconstruct and to provide the money is that there is no trust to the Ukrainian authorities, so there must be a supervisory instruction board that consists of moral authorities from different countries. There must be some line of cooperation between the government and this external controller supervisory body, and then the centralized manner, they should go on with infrastructure projects, whatever projects. That is highly concentrated and centralized approach, and I believe that's not the right one. First of all, in order to reach out for the people and to support grassroots, if we have like some volume of money to spend on Ukraine, the best way would be to finance some of the major mandates of the budget, like pension expenditures or rehabilitation things, instead of giving money in the hands of those who don't know how to deal with just much lesser volumes of money. So essentially, the administrative capacity is not there. The legal framework is not there. So in this case, my approach is very simple. If you have reparation money, if you have money as an insurance for the diseased and the wounded, give money to the people, like 1-2 million to those who were murdered, killed during the war and who suffered. And then there are 45 cities in Ukraine with a population of over 100,000 people. And they should set up like reconstruction centers for their regions. And these reconstruction centers should have people representing civil society, representing donor community, representing moral authorities and local businesses, so that the decisions are made in transparent manner. Today, one of the problems we have is government procurement system, all these governance mechanisms in Ukraine are not transparent. Even Ukrzaliznytsia, you have Ukroboronprom, you have many other monopolies. They're not restructured. And just in the case when you have essentially a syndicate of national bank, big banks, and the government that make a financial market almost non-existent, at the same time they make much more profit. So all these socialist interventionist practices are still there. So after the war, when we have not like 20, 30 billion dollars or euros in the country, but like 10 times more, it could lead to a overhaul and reset of oligarchy system, and instead of the old guys, we have a bunch of new ones. And that's what we want to get. That's why once we have a chance, then tax reform should be the basis, and of course, a much more liberal way for money to enter. And one of the ways to reduce transaction costs, I would offer multi-currency regime for Ukraine, which should legalize 5 currencies: dollar, euro, Swiss franc, Polish zloty, and fund, in addition to hryvnia. As you know, the hryvnia right now is not the serious money that creates, perform the function of money.
Mr. Święcicki, could you please add, having your experience of seeing this process in Poland, what is your comment?
I saw this also in Ukraine to a certain extent, but let me first start with numbers. How much recovery funds are needed for Ukraine to rebuild Ukraine after the war? So according to the estimates made by the World Bank and Ukrainian government, in the middle of the last year, after 6 months of the war, the destruction was estimated at $350 billion, an enormous amount. This was almost a year ago, so now these numbers perhaps should be doubled. And to give you a comparison, this is 3 times more than Marshall Plan for Europe after World War II in present money. It is 3 times more than the budget of the European Union. So enormous funds are required to reconstruct Ukraine. And that's why I think what is necessary is to lobby for confiscation of Russian assets in Western banks, in Western countries. Right now they are only frozen right now. Confiscation is much more difficult politically and legally speaking, but we should lobby and press governments, legislators, politicians to find a way in which those monies that are now frozen, those assets can be confiscated and made available for reconstruction of Ukraine. This is first comment. Second is that we have some positive examples in Ukraine already. For example, EBRD is the greatest foreign investor in Ukraine, so that they know how to transfer money, how to invest in Ukraine. World Bank had a very big operations in Ukraine for several years. Ukraine, after Revolution of Dignity, prepared Prozorro, a system for public procurement, very transparent, very clear, I would say, and it was working, it was activated. Of course, there were some discussions, some problems, but system was working. I remember just before the war, there was a big privatization plan prepared. In Ukraine, there is still about 3,000 state-owned enterprises, and about 1,000 of them was devoted to privatization. And the first privatization was made very transparent. It was privatization of the big hotel in European Plaza in Kiev, Dnipro Hotel. The auction for this hotel was taking place all the day. We could observe on TV or on channels, you know, what is the progress in this auction, and it worked. So we have good examples in Ukraine that are showing that public money can be used efficiently, transparently, without corruption. And we have also local self-government. It is not as advanced, I would say, fully fledged like in Poland or in some Western countries, but still in the big cities, I think the mechanism for investment, for procurement, for this kind of things is more or less transparent, more or less it's working. It's not without a problem, there are problems. So we have a lot of existing channels how to reconstruct infrastructure, how to use public support for various industries. Is this enough? Maybe reconstruction will need new institutions, and also what is important here, the donors will have the right to supervise, to look at, to control, because frankly speaking, this foreign, I would say, kind of the supervision is helping, to find corruption, various temptation, various bad practices, to combat them, in Ukraine. It is still this foreign advisors, foreign observers, foreign participants. For example, when I was a business ombudsman for 2.5 years, I was a member of the so-called nomination committee. It was a committee that was selecting supervisory board members for big state enterprises. There were 5 foreign members of this committee and several Ukrainian members, not so many, also about 5, depending on the company. And we were sitting there, we were discussing, we were interviewing candidates, but without voting power, non-voting members of nomination committee. But it worked. It was a good dialogue. We could really eliminate bad candidates. We could influence the recruitment process for the supervisory boards of big companies. Of course, there were sometimes problems, but nevertheless, system, in many respects, I must say, the system of recruiting supervisory boards in Ukraine for big companies is working 10 times better than what we have right now in Poland. Believe me, I have a comparison what is happening right now in Poland with big state companies and how system worked in Ukraine. In Ukraine, it worked with some problems, yes, that's true, but not the kind and scale and barbaric problems, nepotism that we have right now in Poland.
If I may add one thing, which is very important, I believe. You mentioned that it's more than Marshall Plan. Marshall Plan was 1% of GDP of the countries, of the United States. So the number of volume of dollars that time and right now is different. And right now, if we talk about Marshall Plan for Ukraine, from United States, EU, and like G7 countries, it should be like $800 billion. So that's not, that's the Marshall Plan we should aim at.
Now I would like to move to the topic of the oligarchy and ask you, how do you think will their role merely adjust to the recovery process, or will their influence be eliminated at all? I also would like you to keep the time limit of 2.5 minutes, because unfortunately there are some strict rules here. So I would like to begin with Jaroslav in this regard.
If you keep this kind of Leviathan, 75% of government expenditures, 60% of assets, and huge inflow of cash, you're bound to have a new set of oligarchs. Now the old ones are gone. I mean, some of them are in the country, some of them in so-called Monaco battalion. They don't take part in any activities, they don't support the country. At the same time, their networks are still there. And they have control over some energy structures. They have their stake in different companies around government procurement system. And then, as you rightly said, there's a lot of talk about different good stance governors, corporate governance. At the same time, as it is true in Ukraine, there is like underwater parallel system of decision making. And what we want is not just, better governance of state-owned enterprises and banks like privatized. Privatbank was privatized. And right now, state banks and private banks, big ones, got a lot of profit. In the state of war, what they do is they just bought national bank bonds, they bought T-bonds from the government, they made much cash, and they are not interested in developing SME of the economy. More so, McKinsey, Blackwaters, Accenture, Boston Consulting, all these big guys, they care about, different mechanisms to go and work with big guys. Nobody cares, few people care about the development of SMEs and creating equal playing fields for them. Because if you have this kind of inflow of money and the conditions, and if you have MIGA that ensures sustainability of these economic financial projects, then how could little guys compete with them? What they do is they go to gray area economy, and there they're exposed to these bad guys that eventually go up to General Prosecutor's Office, to Security Council, to whatever other structures exist. That's why we have a chance to overhaul the system and create something new. If we keep this model of welfare state, government intervention, there is no way we can avoid oligarchy.
Jakub, what would you add?
Oligarchs are an issue in Ukraine, as, for example, corruption, which, by the way, is correlated, corruption is. Again, I believe, and I believe it's not just wishful thinking, that the war creates a situation and there is an opportunity to have a new start, a new beginning, and that's true. Oligarchs, some of them are already outside and they won't come back because of the political issues. Some of them stayed, but I believe it's that the current leadership of the country understands clearly that the division line or the demarcation line between the political and big business should be separated more than it used to be before the war. So I believe, again, the war is an opportunity to have a new beginning here in terms of oligarchs, and also, of course, the international community, including those who are at the setting as me at the supervisory board as independent members in the strategic companies. I'm not saying that we are very much well positioned to combat 100% of the issue, but we can help for sure. And this is a product, again, very of the openness of the Ukraine even before the war. And I would echo what Marcin Święcicki said, that it's from this respect, Ukraine already is very much open to the changes to the extent not 10 times but 110 times more than current Poland. I'm saying that sometimes in Poland we have the tendency of thinking that everything is better in Poland than in Ukraine. It's not. Can you imagine a German or Ukrainian sitting at the board of PKP? If it were the case, of course, PKP Intercity wouldn't be much worse company than Укрзалізниця, which is the case right now when you look at the punctuality data, for example. So now in Poland we have the cronies or family members of the peace people, and in Ukraine you have international community chosen in that transparent process by the nomination committee, which is dominated by the foreigners again, by the World Bank and institutions like that. So I'm very optimistic about the answer to that question.
Mr. Święcicki, are you also that much optimistic, or?
A bit optimistic. The problem is, that sometimes in politics it's more, I would say, visible that we are fighting oligarchs. Whereas I am rather for such a system in which oligarchs will not have much to say, will not have much influence. Transparent public procurement, transparent privatization, separation of parliament from oligarchs, from financing of political life, financing of deputies. This should be really very transparent, very under control. Also, all this, Ukraine has the greatest number of anti-corruption institutions in the world right now. And the problem is that those institutions, including business ombudsman, some of them are not really working fully effective, but they should. They also should follow money that is circulating around the government and around the various deputies. I think there is a progress. For example, the present Verkhovna Rada perhaps is less affected by oligarchs than all previous Verkhovna Rada compositions in the past. We have some other achievements, but still, as I say, public procurement, privatization, political life should be separated, and this will solve problem of oligarchs.
Thanks a lot. Unfortunately, since our time is coming to an end, I would really like to thank you for joining us today on this really rainy day, especially given the change of the time. So you're the real heroes. And as a conclusion of what our speakers have already said today, we can say that economic transformation is far from the miracle. It's the real hard work of the real people. And what we need is a good strategy, is a good plan that can be implemented just the next morning after the war. I would really like to ask you, do not forget about Ukraine. Gather together, talk, suggest your ideas. And now I would like to give you floor for the question. We have 4 minutes left, so let's begin. Yeah, please. You can come here, and I'll give it to you here.
Yeah, thank you. I have one question from your personal experience maybe and your information. What are actual economic and political standpoints of Ukrainian leadership right now? Which reform plan are they leaning towards right now? Thank you.
It's difficult to say because of priority. The president is looking for different options how to move forward. We also presented our free market reform proposal there, and unfortunately the war and these major challenges occupy so much time that right now the government is not in the position to start reforms. So we need a general solution in the economy. The biggest issue is that most of the successes of the army is because we have clear leadership, we have territorial defense, we have all the people that are united, and everybody understands that we will win the war. But in economic policy, we have nobody who is associated with any reforms. Like we have Balcerovich as a flagship for reforms, we have Martlar in Estonia, we have Saakashvili and Kaha Bendukidze. In Ukraine, nobody. And that's a major issue that we keep urging Mr. Zelensky to solve.
Yes, I can subscribe to this, that there is no Ukrainian Balcerovich. As a dictator of the economic transformation, of course, there is a lot of liberals in Ukraine in various think tanks and in the various gremiums, and there are a lot of various reports. But somehow the economic policy of the government, presidential palace is not fully coherent. The general directions are okay. European Union, privatization, fight with corruption. I mean the decentralization. In principles and directions are, I don't contest them. But the implementation, the problem is with implementation.
Yeah, I agree with most what my predecessors said. And number one, the war occupies time and everyone is focused on the war effort. We need to fight the enemy. Then we will be thinking about the day one or day zero plan ahead. Second, the war, it's like Ukrainians understand who turned out to be a hero, who turned out to be the opposite because of the war conditions. And we have the examples of people who performed excellent or overperformed, to the extreme. One of them, it's my opinion. As someone who oversees Укрзалізниця, Alexander Kamyshin, who used to be a head of Укрзалізниця until last Friday, so 9 days ago, he left. He resigned because he was supposed to set up the Brussels office of Укрзалізниця, which will be in charge of taking advantage of the European money for Ukrainian railway infrastructure. But a day after we made a decision to shift him from Kiev to Brussels, President Zelensky nominated him as a Minister for Strategic Industries. At the first, in the first moment, I thought strategic industry, perhaps it's energy. But no, it's a weapon, armory-producing industry. So that's, for me, the example, and it shows you how what's the situation currently in Kiev, in Ukraine, and how it operates. If you have a good person who turned out to be an effective CEO of probably definitely one of the most important company in Ukraine, he was shifted to another extremely difficult and important field, which is producing armor for the victory. And we have no idea who will be in charge, but of course, economic Zaluzny or Balcerowicz is needed.
Thank you so much for your comments. Unfortunately, we are tight on time and we have to give the floor to the next speakers today. Thanks for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.